The Catholic Morning Show.
Yeah, folks, look, you want to make sure to have your coat and maybe double coats on here as it is blustery this morning, but we got you covered. If you're listening here on Iowa Catholic Radio, we're here to warm you up, getting you ready for the new week. First week of Lent, we got that half week out of the way. We can really buckle down and get into the Lenten season together. Glad you're with us here on Iowa Catholic Radio for the Catholic Morning Show. I'm your host, Bo Bonner, with Matt Wilkham, Alexia Baker as well. On the second half of the show, we will speak with Dr. Scott Heffelfinger. It's going to be about the Heart of Prayer Lenten series. But right now, let's turn to our first guest of the day. Dr. Jared Staudt is the Director of Content for Exodus 90, instructor for Rosary College, but he is the editor and author of a few of the chapters in the new book, The American Catholic Land Movement, Past, Present, and Future from Tan Books. Jared, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Thanks for having me.
It is wonderful to have you. Now, look, the Catholic Land Movement with Father Vincent McNabb, if people might be familiar with that, especially its sort of English roots, but this is the American Catholic Land Movement. And I think the idea, right, is to say how those principles maybe of the land movement in its first sort of idea is starting to take root here in the United States.
Well, actually, right at the same time of Father McNabb and Chesterton and Belloc in England, there was a very strong land movement in the United States as well. So it's one of the things that we explore. You have that Catholic Rural Life Conference. You actually have the Catholic Worker Movement as part of that. There's actually a strong connection both to the liturgical movement that based out of St. John's in Collegeville, that there was a strong connection to the land there, but also a connection to the Southern agrarians, and they even cooperated with Belloc in particular in their work. So we're trying to highlight an overlooked connection to America, but also to broaden it out and to look at how even from the time of the colonization of the Americas, that Catholics were specifically settling the land in the name of God. That was actually the name of the first mission within the territorial United States down in Florida. And how this mission continues to unfold. There's a whole new movement underway right now, especially with remote work. And so Catholics continue to feel this call, which has an economic aspect, but it also relates deeply to family life. Because people want to live a more human life, but also a holier life, to connect to what we call the liturgy of the land itself, to guide us throughout the year and learning from the book of nature as we worship God.
Well, yeah, I was going to point that out too, right? This is the Liturgy of the Land series, so of course that's implying more to come. What was the idea of creating a series about this understanding of the liturgy of the land?
So this is the second volume in that series. The first one is from my co-editor, Jason Craig, who has a volume simply called The Liturgy of the Land. And that one just looks a little bit more closely at life on the land itself and what it would mean for somebody to make the kind of move that his family made, my family has made to North Carolina in particular. And now we're trying to lay out kind of the big picture of how Americans have been making this move throughout our history. And as the series continues to develop, we'll be looking at, particular practical aspects of what, life on the land entails.
So the in memoriam for John Sr., and then, of course, you have a chapter from one of John Sr.'s disciples, Father Francis Bethel, who's, of course, the Benedictine monk at Clear Creek. That's just one angle to point out the sort of rediscovery of reality angle. That there's of course, John Sr. known for the great books, sort of culture that he helped really inspire and flower here in the United States. What's maybe the connection of that, the sort of a poetic understanding of education and knowledge, and maybe a poetic understanding of the land itself?
Well, we've become so saturated by technology that we really need to get back to the basics, and that was part of that seeking a more human life. John Sr. would talk about poetic knowledge and the fact that we have to experience things to be rooted in reality before we can talk about them abstractly. And so I think that the land movement has huge implications even for education, because our students now, our young people, have to experience reality in this way, I think, to awaken their minds to truth, because we know that kids just aren't learning. And partly it's because we're just throwing information at them, more information than ever before. They're overloaded. But what they don't have is a strong foundation of human experience and learning from God's creation itself. So John Sr. has certainly been a big inspiration for us. He's inspired a lot of families to relocate to the land, and of course has inspired the monks of Clear Creek. And I mentioned them in the book even as a model. What does life on the land look like? How do we really follow that liturgy of the land? Well, monasteries really give us a huge example of what that could look like for us as families, right, in an adapted and distinct way.
So speaking of your co-editor, Jason Craig, his chapter mentions Wendell Berry, himself not Catholic, but I would say a lot of Catholic sensibilities, a lot of Catholics who look to Wendell Berry particularly as inspiration in the discussion about return to the land or the understanding of farming in its place in agriculture here in the United States. What are some of the other sources? We got Clear Creek, we got John Sr., the monks, Wendell Berry. What are some other the sources that this book tackles to try to weave together, like you said, a coherent picture of this movement?
Well, we have Father Edwin O'Hara, who actually becomes an archbishop, who is the founder of the Catholic Rural Life Conference, and Father Rawl, who was another key figure in that movement. We have Peter Marin and Dorothy Day, the founders of the Catholic Worker Movement. We have the leaders of the Southern Agrarian Movement, especially Tate, who is a Catholic convert from that movement. But, just to come back to Wendell Berry, it is interesting how he has been inspiring so many Catholics. Alistair McIntyre even called him a natural Thomist. But I think he's helped so many of us, myself included, just to try to understand our connection to our food. Where does it come from? How can we, really be healthier, and how that relates to trying to be holier, to be good stewards of the land that God has given us, to understand the state of agriculture in the United States, which has become very industrialized. So just heavy use of pesticides. Now we have genetically modified food. And so he's helped us to understand the connection of our own bodies to the land, and what we're doing to the land actually helps us to understand the ways in which we are doing similar things to our own bodies, in the sense of loading them down with chemicals and not being good stewards of them as well. So it's an eclectic collection. We even have a chapter on, outdoorsmen, being good stewards through hunting and fishing. But when we look at the whole thing, it helps us to understand the ways in which we have a great heritage, even going back all the way to the missions. How we've had these powerful figures like Dorothy Day and John Sr. and Wendell Berry. But this is a legacy that needs to be continued. And there's a lot of challenges and also opportunities that we can take advantage of right now within our culture to live differently, to live an intentional Catholic life, and to really evangelize and heal through the land.
Well, that understanding of stewardship, we obviously a word coded from the gospel within sort of Christians, sensibilities. A lot of things are spoken of in terms of stewardship. Why is it particularly with the idea of returning to the land that stewarding becomes so prominent?
Well, if we go all the way back to the beginning, we can see how our connection to the land is not superficial. I mean, the very first command that God has given us is to be fruitful. And, of course, that involves human procreation, but it also relates to the fertility of the land itself, that God has given us dominion over the earth and all of its creatures in his name. And so stewardship is a fundamental human task that we exercise creativity through our work that actually brings forth a greater fertility than just leaving the earth to itself, that we can bring forth more grapes, right, by cultivating the vine, and that even caring for, forests makes them healthier than just kind of abandoning them to themselves. So God gave Adam the task to till and to protect. You could say to cultivate and to care would be another way of defining that. And it's something that all of us, no matter where we live, in the city, the suburbs, the country, we all have to find our way of entering into that task. And it is a task of stewardship. God has given us our own particular gifts, but he's also put us in a particular place at a particular time so that we can, really bring forth the fruit of this place and this time through our own creativity.
The book is The American Catholic Land Movement, Past, Present, and Future, part of the Liturgy of the Land series from Tanned Books. The editors are Jason Craig, and who we've been speaking to today, Dr. Jared Staudt. Where else can they find out more about what you're up to, or just this general topic, if people are interested?
Well, you can find my work at buildingcatholicculture.com and see some of the other books that I've been working on. I think if you're interested in the land, you can go to St. Joseph's Farm to see the work of my friend Jason Craig. And you can also check out Catholic Rural Life, and there is the Catholic Land Movement that has local chapters throughout the country as well.
Absolutely wonderful. Again, Jared, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Thanks so much for having me.